There is a version of you that you haven't met yet. A version so cold, so calculated, and so relentlessly consistent that if you met him today, you wouldn't recognize him. You would fear him. But here's the question: why haven't you met that version yet? Is it because you're not ready? Or because you're too attached to the weaker one? The one who hits snooze, who needs a crowd to stay committed, who folds the moment life gets inconvenient. You say you want change, but your actions worship comfort. You talk about purpose, but chase distractions like they'll save you. That version of you fear. It's not some fantasy. It's what's left after you kill your excuses, after you bury the emotional chaos and tear away the lies you've told yourself about timing and motivation. Stoicism doesn't hand you comfort. It strips you bare. It forces you to stand in front of your own reflection and ask, am I who I claim to be, or am I still pretending? The Stoics believed that virtue is action, not intention. That freedom isn't granted, it's earned through self-mastery. If you're still watching this, it means some part of you is ready to burn through the illusions, not for approval, not for recognition, but because you are finally done living beneath your potential. If that resonates, consider subscribing, because it marks a choice, a quiet, personal declaration: I will not live asleep anymore. It always starts quietly. There's no announcement, no dramatic turning point, just the subtle death of something that once had control over you. At first, you barely notice it. The internal voice, the one that used to ask how you felt, whether you were tired, whether you had time today, it starts losing its grip. You don't argue with it anymore. You don't bargain. You don't entertain its excuses or stall its demands with false promises of tomorrow. You just move. The alarm rings and you rise. The schedule arrives and you act. Not with resentment, not with hesitation, but with a calm, almost emotionless certainty. That's where the real transformation begins. Because most people are still in negotiation, still weighing whether they're in the mood to follow through on the life they said they wanted. They're stuck in endless deals with themselves, always trying to trade comfort for progress, always looking for a shortcut through discipline that doesn't hurt. When you let go of negotiation, you step into a world that's almost invisible to the average person. They don't see what's changed, but they feel it. You don't react the way you used to. You don't flinch under pressure. You don't explain your moves. And this new version of you, it unnerves people because it's clean, clear, direct. It doesn't leave room for their projections, their doubts, their need to be reassured that you're still playing small like them. The truth is, when you stop asking for permission, especially from the weaker parts of yourself, you step outside the predictable patterns that define most lives. You are no longer governed by what feels good in the moment. You're moved by something deeper: duty, clarity, purpose. There's a kind of quiet violence in that. Not a violence toward others, but toward the parts of you that once held you hostage. The part that told you to wait. The part that said, be realistic. The part that said, you've done enough for today. Every time you act without negotiating, you drive a wedge between who you were and who you're becoming. That gap grows, and the old voice, the old urges, the old habits, they begin to starve. At first they scream, then they whisper, then they fall silent. And that silence is sacred, because it's the moment you realize you no longer belong to your impulses. You no longer belong to your doubts. You belong to your word. That's what separates those who rise from those who loop. Most people think freedom is doing what you want, but as Epictetus said, no person is free who is not master of themselves. Discipline isn't a cage. It's the blade that cuts through confusion and grants clarity. You don't act because you feel like it. You act because that's who you are now. And that identity is unshakable because it's not built on feeling. It's built on principle, on repetition, on consistency earned in silence, not shouted for approval. That's the irony most people miss. They think discipline looks like suffering, like restriction. But when you live inside of it, it feels like relief. There's no debate in the morning, no guilt in the evening, no emotional crash between failure and regret. There is only movement, steady, clean, focused, and people begin to notice, though they can't explain what's different. You haven't posted anything, you haven't announced anything, but your presence speaks louder than your past ever could. It's in the way you carry yourself, the way you look through noise instead of reacting to it, the way you keep showing up when others would have stopped 3 attempts ago. That's what makes you terrifying, not in a cruel way, but in a way that makes people look at their own lives and feel the weight of their excuses. You're not unfeeling. You just stopped waiting for the right mood. You're not robotic. You're just deliberate. And that difference between motion driven by clarity and motion driven by emotion, that difference is the difference between building something that lasts and relapsing into chaos. This is why you start small, because killing the negotiator inside you isn't an event, it's a process. You don't argue with your distractions, you outlive them. You don't beg your mind to obey, you train it like a muscle. And every day you do, the weaker self, the one that delayed, doubted, complained, fades a little more, until one day you catch your reflection in the mirror and you realize something. You didn't just become disciplined, you became dangerous, not because you can control others, but because you can finally control yourself. That's what scares people, that you don't ask for motivation, that you don't stall with emotional explanations, that you just move. You say nothing, but your consistency speaks volumes. You don't need sympathy, you need direction. You don't wait to feel ready. You act until readiness becomes irrelevant. That's the path. That's the process. And once you've lived that enough times, you won't remember the last time you asked yourself whether you felt like it, because you won't care. That question no longer belongs in your mind. That version of you that once hesitated, once explained, once needed to be convinced, they're gone. And in their place stands someone who doesn't waver, doesn't ask, doesn't need, just moves, just acts, just becomes. At one point, you probably shared every decision you made, the goals you set, the plans you started, the promises to turn things around. You talked about the new schedule, the early mornings, the diet, the grind. You felt like if you said it loud enough, if enough people knew, then maybe you'd follow through. Maybe the pressure would hold you accountable, but it never did it? Because talking gave you the feeling of movement without any of the sacrifice. And over time, you learned the truth that no one tells you. When you speak too soon, you waste the fire. You let the pressure out before it can build power. Real change doesn't need a megaphone. It doesn't need an audience. It needs silence. Not because you're hiding, but because you're finally home in your discipline. You don't have to explain the work when you become the work. That's when things shift. It's strange how silence becomes your armor, not because it protects you from others, but because it protects your focus from their noise. The moment you stop sharing everything is the moment you stop seeking approval. And without that need for validation, you gain something rarer than praise: presence. People who once felt close to you might start saying you're distant, cold, detached. But what they're really feeling is your stillness, and stillness is deeply unsettling to the chaotic. Because most people don't know how to exist without noise. They panic in quiet. They seek constant feedback to feel alive, but discipline doesn't seek attention. It becomes attention. You walk into a room without a word, and something shifts. Not because you demand respect, but because your silence demands self-respect. It's the look in your eyes, the way you no longer explain, the way your actions arrive unannounced and irreversible. You've become something they can't read, and what people can't read, they fear. At first, that silence feels strange, like you're holding something back, but eventually it becomes peace. You realize how much energy you wasted narrating your journey to people who were never walking with you. People who didn't understand the weight of your ambition but felt entitled to comment on it. So you let go. You let go of the need to convince them, to make them comfortable with your growth. And in that quiet, you grow faster, deeper, because no one is interrupting, no one is reacting, no one is projecting their limitations onto your work. It's just you, the path, and the sound of your own breath. You finally hear yourself think, and more importantly, you hear yourself believe. That's the voice that used to be drowned out by applause, by commentary, by shallow encouragement. Now it's clear. Now it leads. The Stoics understood the value of this stillness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The more we value things outside our control, the less control we have. And when you constantly speak about what you plan to do, you hand over your power. You give your energy to things you can't hold, to opinions, to likes, to praise. Silence reclaims that energy. It gathers it like a storm. It holds it close, refines it, sharpens it. So when you do act, when you execute, it's not tentative. It's not diluted by needing to be understood. It's direct, clean, heavy. And that weight can only come from the depth of work done alone, in private, in quiet. You don't need an audience to become excellent. You just need to decide that attention is not the goal. Mastery is. That's the paradox. The less you speak, the more people want to know what you're doing. The less you share, the more they speculate. Silence creates mystery, and mystery holds power. But you're not silent to manipulate. You're silent because you're working, because the process demands it, because explaining every step only distracts you from the next. And in the time others spend talking about the life they want, you've built the foundation for it, quietly, relentlessly, without fanfare. That's the difference between movement and momentum. Movement can be chaotic, noisy, showy. Momentum is quiet. It builds underground until it breaks the surface, and when it does, it's undeniable. People might accuse you of being distant, of being cold. Let them. They don't understand that solitude was necessary, that in order to hear your own values, you had to mute theirs, that to follow your own path, you had to step away from theirs. They think silence means disconnection, but the truth is, it means connection, just not to them, to something deeper, to something lasting. Seneca once said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." And if no one around you fits that standard, then your silence becomes your shield. It becomes the sacred space where your discipline can grow without being contaminated by mediocrity. Eventually, your silence becomes your signature. You no longer explain your habits, your schedule, your standards. People just notice. You walk past them and they feel the weight of your choices without a word spoken. They see the results, and those results are louder than anything you could have said, because discipline leaves a trail. It writes its own story. It needs no introduction, and if you stay committed long enough, that story begins to speak for you. Without hashtags, without posts, without announcements, just presence, just execution, just the quiet certainty that you no longer need to be seen because you know who you are. That is what makes silence a signal, not of absence, but of focus, not of retreat, but of preparation. You haven't vanished, you've just realigned. You've stepped into a space where every move is intentional, where every hour has weight, where every day serves the mission, and because you no longer need applause, you've become immune to the fear of being overlooked. You've traded visibility for vision, and that trade will always pay back more than popularity ever could. Discipline doesn't ask for recognition. It earns it, quietly, over time. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't beg to be seen. It demands to be respected. That's the life you're building now, in silence, in strength, and in total alignment with the person you said you'd become. You still feel everything. That's the part most people misunderstand. They assume that being disciplined means being numb, disconnected, emotionless. But that's not the truth. The disciplined person feels every ounce of pressure, every wave of doubt, every ache of exhaustion. The difference is, they don't obey it. Emotions show up, uninvited and often unwanted, but they don't sit in the driver's seat. They knock, they shout, they plead, but the door stays closed. You can't eliminate emotion, and you shouldn't try. You can only put it in its proper place. Like wind against a ship, it can push you off course if you're not anchored. But if you know how to navigate it, it can even help you move forward. The key is control, not of the emotion itself, but of how you respond to it. Think about how many decisions you've made just to feel something different. How many times you skipped the workout, not because it made sense, but because comfort felt better. How many tasks you delayed because boredom whispered, later. How many goals you paused because fear whispered, what if it doesn't work? Emotions are persuasive. They wear the voice of reason even when they make no sense, and unless you've trained your mind to pause, to hold, to assess, you'll fall for it every time. The disciplined person still hears those voices, but they've developed a second voice, one that doesn't argue, doesn't panic, doesn't collapse, one that simply says, proceed. Not because the emotion isn't real, but because it doesn't have authority. You'll feel the pull to stop, especially when progress is invisible. You'll feel the desire to distract, especially when focus starts to hurt. You'll feel the hunger for something easier, especially when the path gets lonely. All of this is expected. It's not a flaw in your system, it is the system. You're not being tested to see if you can avoid emotion. You're being trained to act through it. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this is what discipline really does. It exposes the patterns. It brings light to the emotional reactions that used to control you in the dark. It doesn't suppress, it reveals. There's a difference between acknowledging a storm and stepping into it. You can watch the rain fall, you can hear the thunder, but if you have a mission, you put on the coat and walk anyway. That's discipline, not the absence of rain, but the refusal to let it stop you. Emotional weather will always change. One day you'll feel unstoppable. The next, you'll feel like quitting before you begin. But the disciplined person knows the truth. Feelings are not facts. They are just data. You take the information and then you decide what matters. The goal doesn't change. The schedule doesn't change. The commitment doesn't pause just because your mood dipped. This isn't about being harsh with yourself. It's about being honest. Too many people confuse kindness with indulgence. They think listening to every emotion is self-care. But sometimes, self-care is discipline. Sometimes, love for yourself is saying, no, we keep going. Because you know what's on the other side of consistency. You felt the pride of following through when everything inside wanted to fold, and you felt the regret of quitting for comfort. That contrast teaches you more than any book ever could. It teaches you that emotional authority doesn't come from silence. It comes from structure, from showing up anyway, from doing what must be done, especially when it feels like the last thing you want to do. The more you train this way, the quieter the chaos becomes. Not because it disappears, but because you've changed your relationship to it. You no longer panic when doubt arises. You just breathe. You no longer crumble under frustration. You just adjust. You've built a mind that knows how to hold the line. And that kind of mind, steady, unbending, alert, is rare. Most people fold at the first feeling of discomfort. They label it a sign. They call it intuition. But the disciplined know better. They know that intuition must be sharpened through action, not just emotion. That not every discomfort is a warning. Sometimes it's just resistance before growth. When emotions become background noise instead of commands, you become efficient. You become focused. You become incredibly difficult to knock off course. And that's when people start asking how you do it, how you stay so consistent, so stable, so unaffected. But they don't see the work. They don't see the mental reps, the moments you sat in frustration and didn't react, the moments you faced self-doubt and didn't flinch, the moments you were bone-tired and still followed through. They only see the surface, but beneath it is a mind trained to act, not from emotion, but from clarity. Aristotle once believed that excellence was not an act, but a habit. This habit isn't built when everything feels good. It's built when everything screams to stop, and you don't. When you train that way long enough, you don't just develop discipline, you develop peace. Because nothing inside you is fighting anymore. The emotions are there, yes, but they're no longer loud. They're no longer pulling you in 10 directions. They've been heard, but they've also been overruled. Calmly, consistently, and that calm is what makes the disciplined so unnerving to others. Because when you can't be easily swayed, you become rare, and when you become rare, you become powerful. Not because you dominate the world, but because you've finally learned how to lead yourself. You don't need to shock the world to be powerful. You don't need to throw surprises or reinvent yourself every month just to stay relevant. You just need to become someone whose word, especially to yourself, is law. Predictability, in the way most people use it, sounds boring. It sounds like stagnation. But there's a different kind of predictability. The kind that doesn't bend when the wind shifts. The kind that doesn't ask how hard the day will be before deciding how much to give. The kind that becomes so rooted in consistent action that it almost looks unshakable from the outside. That's the kind of predictability that scares people. Because when you move without needing the push, without needing the praise, without needing the right conditions, you break the mold they've come to expect from others, and even from themselves. There's something unsettling about a person who does what they said they would, even when nobody is checking. There's a quiet tension to it, a steady intensity that doesn't beg to be noticed but can't be ignored. Because it's rare, most people flinch the moment pressure arrives. They act when the spotlight's on and stall the minute it turns off. Their entire rhythm is reactive. But when you're disciplined, your rhythm doesn't change. It doesn't depend on attention. It doesn't shift based on mood or convenience. You become dependable in a way that makes people question their own inconsistency. And without ever raising your voice or forcing your will, you start to lead, because others sense something in you they haven't built in themselves. When you become predictable to yourself, you stop breaking promises quietly. You stop waking up in the morning wondering if you'll follow through. You stop planning things just to abandon them the moment emotion or chaos gets in the way. And instead, your days start to feel solid, grounded. You build momentum, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer debating. You already decided. And when something is already decided, energy doesn't get wasted on convincing yourself again. You just move, like gravity, like seasons, like a law of nature. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." The disciplined person doesn't need to speak loudly, because their actions have already built a pattern. That pattern becomes identity. That identity becomes power. Not power over others, but power over uncertainty, power over hesitation, power over the emotional swings that take most people out of alignment. When you act predictably, not because you're being watched, but because it's simply who you are now, life changes. Not dramatically at first, but piece by piece, brick by brick, you earn something that can't be faked, self-respect. And that respect becomes your backbone. It's easy to set goals. Everyone does it. It's easy to talk about ambition. Everyone has some version of it. But the rarest thing is to see someone quietly building every single day, even when no one's clapping, even when the results are months away, even when the road is repetitive and thankless. That kind of person starts to move differently. They don't rush to prove themselves anymore. They don't over-explain their intentions. They don't talk much about their discipline because they don't need to. The proof is everywhere, in their health, in their habits, in their tone, in their ability to stay calm when others unravel. Because someone who has control over their daily actions eventually gains control over their entire life. And when people witness that kind of consistency, they don't always cheer. Sometimes they resist. Sometimes they mock it or misunderstand it. Because seeing someone so consistent, so focused, reminds them of what they're not doing. It exposes the areas in their life where they've let comfort lead. But you're not trying to expose anyone. You're just following through, again and again and again. And with each day, you stop needing permission. You stop needing motivation. You stop needing the outside world to align before you take the next step. You become your own authority. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one." That's the mindset you adopt when your actions align with your values, regardless of who's watching. You don't need to talk about your intentions because you've already embodied them. You're not chasing inspiration anymore. You're building it through repetition. And in doing so, you become someone others can rely on. But more importantly, someone you can rely on. You've erased the internal doubt that used to whisper, "Will I actually do it this time?" Because now the answer is yes, not as a guess, but as a fact. It's already written into your system. There's peace in that. Peace in waking up and knowing your behavior doesn't swing wildly based on the weather, the news, or how your friends feel that day. Peace in knowing that discipline has given you a structure stronger than circumstance. That no matter what's falling apart around you, your process remains intact. And that kind of stability, it spreads. It strengthens every part of your life. Your relationships feel different. Your work sharpens. Your mind clears. Because you're no longer pulled in every direction. You have direction. And in the rare moments when chaos does try to break through, you don't panic. You don't crumble. You just pause, adjust, and return to the pattern that built you. That's what discipline gives you, a lifeline that doesn't waver when life does. You don't need to predict the future when you've made yourself predictable in the best way. You already know how you'll respond, and knowing that gives you something that almost no one has, certainty in yourself. That certainty isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it just shows up every day in the small choices, the quiet wins, the repeated follow-through. And over time, those tiny moments become your legacy. Because while the world runs in circles chasing what's new, what's exciting, what's easy, you just keep showing up. And that makes you unstoppable. Not because you move fast, but because you never stop. There's a shift that happens when you finally stop needing to be understood. At first it feels like loss. You stop explaining your choices, your schedule, your standards, and people pull back. They don't know how to respond to someone who's no longer performing for their approval. They say you've changed. They say you're distant. But what they really mean is, you've stopped making them comfortable. You're not chasing the same things. You're not clinging to the same need to be liked. You're building a life now that isn't about impressing people. It's about withstanding storms. And when you live like that, when your days are rooted in structure instead of seeking, you start to feel the difference. Not right away, but slowly, steadily, like a weight you've been carrying your whole life, just disappears. Discipline and detachment go hand in hand, because real discipline isn't just about structure. It's about the ability to walk alone. It's about choosing a path with fewer eyes on it. Less praise, less applause, but more peace. At some point, you realize that the attention you were chasing wasn't building you, it was draining you. It was tying your identity to the reactions of others. And when they applauded, you felt worthy. When they didn't, you questioned yourself. But once you detach, once you stop needing their nod before you take another step, you become someone they can't control, someone they can't predict, someone who does not rise and fall based on public approval, but on private integrity. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to do that, you have to let go of the version of yourself that was built to be accepted, the one shaped by other people's comfort zones, the one who watered down every ambition to avoid being called too much. You have to burn that version. And that burning, it's lonely. People drift, conversations feel shallow, you start to feel like a stranger in familiar places. But that discomfort is not a sign you're lost. It's a sign you're no longer available for the life that was built on needing permission. Most people never get here. They stay tethered to the performance, to being liked, to being agreeable, even if it means never becoming what they're capable of. But you're different now. You've chosen discipline over distraction, silence over noise, purpose over popularity, and that means you don't explain every choice. You don't try to make people understand why you're doing what you're doing. You just do it. And that kind of detachment, it's powerful, because it says, I know who I am, I know what I'm building, and I don't need you to validate it for it to be real. You'll notice something strange when you reach this level of discipline. The more focused you become, the more people misunderstand you. They confuse stillness with coldness, focus with arrogance, distance with superiority. But they don't realize you're not above them. You're just no longer available for anything that pulls you off mission. Your time has weight now. Your boundaries are real. Your energy is earned. And not everyone can handle that shift. But you weren't building this life to be understood. You were building it to be lived. Seneca once said, "If you live in harmony with nature, you will never be poor. If you live according to what others think, you will never be rich." And that's the difference. The richest kind of life isn't one full of followers, likes, or endless praise. It's a life with space, a life where you move deliberately, anchored in your values, not dragged by someone else's. When you detach from approval, you stop begging for scraps of attention. You stop shrinking to stay digestible. You grow, not for applause, but because growth is who you are now. And here's what most won't tell you. Detachment isn't cold. It's not emotionless. It's not selfish. It's focused. It's clear. It's rooted in something deeper than social performance. It's built on an internal compass that doesn't spin every time someone has an opinion. That kind of clarity is rare. And because it's rare, it feels foreign at first. But in that clarity, you find peace. Because you're no longer reacting to everyone else's version of your life. You're finally living your own. You start to see just how much of your past was shaped by fear of being misunderstood. How many times you said yes to avoid tension. How often you betrayed your own standards to keep the peace. But peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of alignment. And real alignment only comes when you stop asking the world to clap for your progress and start showing up whether they see it or not, whether they like it or not, whether they stay or not. That's where the power lives, in the quiet refusal to explain, in the decision to keep going without asking who's coming with you. You'll lose people, that's inevitable, But what you gain, clarity, alignment, sovereignty, is worth everything you leave behind. Because once you detach from needing their understanding, their support, their praise, you stop being a reflection of other people's fears. You become a mirror of their potential. And not everyone wants to see that. But you didn't come here to be soft. You came here to build something real. You don't need to be liked to live well. You don't need to be followed to be effective. What you need is to be honest, disciplined, detached from the need to be received in a certain way. You walk your path, not because it's celebrated, but because it's yours. And in the end, the world won't remember the one who blended in. They'll remember the one who stood still in their truth, while everything around them begged them to bend. And you'll sleep peacefully knowing you didn't bend. You just built, quietly, consistently, alone if you had to, but never lost, only free. You're not exhausted because you've been pushing too hard. You're exhausted because you've been living beneath your potential, and deep down, you know it. It's not the workload that drains you, it's the weight of compromise. It's waking up with a plan and letting it slip before noon. It's breaking your own word more times than you can count. That's the fatigue no amount of rest can fix. Because every time you lower your standard to make things easier, you lose a part of your strength. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. You start to believe you can't hold yourself to anything higher. That belief becomes a pattern. That pattern becomes your life. Low standards are deceptively heavy. They feel light in the moment because they allow shortcuts, excuses, softness. But over time, they cost more than they promise. They trap you in cycles of temporary relief, followed by deep regret. You feel guilt, then motivation, then burnout, then guilt again. And around you go, wondering why nothing feels stable. It's not because you can't do more, it's because you've accepted less as normal. Less effort, less structure, less clarity, and that acceptance slowly strips away your edge. It dulls you until you forget what it felt like to be sharp. The truth is, most people stay tired because they keep making exceptions. They treat standards like goals instead of baselines, something optional, something nice to hit when everything lines up. But real discipline isn't a burst of inspiration, it's a floor you refuse to fall below. A standard so solid that even on your worst day, you don't sink into nothingness. You still show up, you still move, you still execute, not perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency builds something far more powerful than motivation ever could: self-trust. And here's what most people miss. Raising your standards isn't punishment, it's freedom. Because when your standards are low, you're constantly negotiating, constantly trying to talk yourself into doing the bare minimum. It's exhausting. But when you raise the bar, when you make certain things non-negotiable, you create peace. You eliminate the daily debate. You build rhythm, structure, stability. Suddenly, you don't waste energy deciding whether you'll train today, or meditate, or show up for your goals. You just do it, not because it's easy, but because it's who you are now. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and that includes the part of you that's been coasting, the part that fears what might happen if you demanded more, because raising your standards forces you to confront your old self, the one that settled, the one that broke promises quietly, the one that called discipline too much, and letting go of that version is uncomfortable. It means becoming someone you haven't fully met yet, someone sharper, more intentional, more exacting, not just with results, but with effort, with focus, with time. That's why most avoid it. Because raising your standards isn't just a mindset, it's a war with your comfort zone. It's the refusal to let past versions of yourself decide your future. It's the bold decision to say, "I don't care how I've lived up until now. This is where the line is drawn, and once that line is drawn, everything changes. Not overnight, but steadily, because every time you keep a promise to yourself under pressure, you reinforce the new identity. The identity of someone who finishes what they start, who doesn't fold under discomfort, who moves with precision even when no one's watching. Over time, that identity becomes so solid that you don't even recognize the old you, the one who needed 5 alarms, the one who let a bad morning destroy a good day, the one who blamed circumstances instead of adjusting to them. That version fades, not by force, but by standards. Because when the floor is raised, the weak parts of you can no longer survive. They can't breathe in the new environment. They either adapt or they dissolve. And what's left is someone who moves with a kind of quiet certainty, a kind of calm that doesn't need to announce itself. Seneca wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." You raise your standards not because you've already mastered the next level, but because you're ready to outgrow the current one. And yes, it will feel like pressure. Yes, it will feel like friction. But pressure is how strength is formed, and friction is how you smooth out the parts of yourself that have been holding you back. You don't rise by waiting for ease. You rise by raising what you're willing to accept. You're not asking for perfection. You're anchoring yourself in effort, in the refusal to settle, in the discipline of becoming someone that you yourself respect. Because if you don't respect your own effort, no external success will ever feel real. It'll always feel borrowed, and borrowed confidence always fades. Discipline isn't a punishment for who you are. It's the structure that allows you to become who you could be. When the standard is low, you trip over your own potential. You drown in shallow routines. But when the bar is high, you rise to meet it, not all at once, but day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment, until one day you realize, this isn't hard anymore. It's just who you are. Respect is often misunderstood. We're taught to direct it outward, toward authority, toward tradition, toward the expectations of others. But the kind of respect that transforms your life doesn't begin with the external. It starts with how you treat yourself when no one's watching. Every time you hit snooze, skip the workout, cut corners, or break a promise you made to yourself, it chips away at something deeper than just productivity. It erodes trust. Not trust from others, but trust from within. And when you lose that, it doesn't matter how confident you look on the outside. You'll always carry the weight of knowing you've been negotiating with your own potential. Discipline isn't about perfection. It's about self-honor. It's about proving to yourself that you are worthy of effort, that your time means something, that your goals deserve to be followed through, even when the motivation isn't there to make it feel good. The people who show up consistently, even in silence, even when it's boring, don't do it because they're superhuman. They do it because they've made a decision. I matter enough to take myself seriously. And once that standard is set, your behavior starts to match. You stop making excuses. You stop explaining why it didn't happen. You just follow through, quietly, deliberately, like it's non-negotiable. Because it is. That's the shift most never make. They continue treating their goals like ideas, not obligations, like maybe they'll get to it, maybe not, like it's flexible. But what happens when you treat your focus like gold? What happens when your time becomes sacred? You start walking differently. You speak less, but everything you do says more. People feel the difference. You carry weight. Not because you're loud or demanding, but because your consistency builds gravity. It creates presence, and presence is rare in a world full of noise. Discipline creates space, not just in your schedule, but in your soul. It clears out the clutter of uncertainty. It cuts through the distractions. It teaches you how to prioritize what truly matters over what temporarily feels good. When you're disciplined, you don't have to rush. You don't have to scramble. You're no longer at war with time because you're aligned with it. You don't let your days slip through your fingers. You grip them, you use them, you make them count. And in doing so, you start to like who you see in the mirror. Not because you've arrived, but because you've stopped running from your own standards. And that reflection starts to guide everything. The way you eat, the way you move, the way you speak, the way you think. You stop waiting for life to give you permission. You stop waiting for someone to save you. You become the person you once hoped would walk in and tell you what to do. You become your own example, and in doing so, you earn something money, praise, or status can't buy: self-respect. That quiet confidence that comes from knowing, I don't need to explain myself. I live it. That's why discipline isn't just about grinding. It's about alignment. It's about making your actions match your values. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That's what it means to respect yourself. It's not about setting goals. It's about living like those goals are already part of your identity, about removing the gap between what you say you want and how you show up every day. And the closer that gap gets, the more peace you feel. Not because life gets easier, but because you no longer carry the weight of living out of sync with yourself. In time, others begin to feel that alignment. You don't have to announce your progress. You don't have to convince anyone of your seriousness. Your presence does the talking. Your energy changes. People adjust around it, not because you've become intimidating, but because you've become solid, stable, grounded. And in a world built on distractions and inconsistency, stability is rare. It's powerful. It holds its own space. You don't demand attention, but you command respect. And it's not because you've become someone else. It's because you've finally started treating yourself like someone worth becoming. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free, and discipline is an act of bravery. It's stepping up when everything inside wants to fall back. It's choosing long-term value over short-term escape. It's doing the hard thing again and again until it becomes second nature. And when that happens, freedom shows up, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you no longer live in conflict with your own word. You say it, you do it, and that reliability becomes your identity. You'll still have off days, you'll still feel resistance, but you won't quit, because the standard is set, because you've built something stronger than mood or circumstance. You've built integrity, you've built respect, and every time you live by that, you teach the world how to treat you, not through demands, but through discipline, not through noise, but through consistency. In the end, discipline isn't about being hard on yourself. It's about being honest. It's about acting like you matter, like your future matters, like your choices echo far beyond the moment you make them. And when you begin living that way, not someday, but now, people will feel it. Not because you tell them, but because everything about you will say, without words, I keep my promises, especially to myself. At first, it's mechanical. You do what you must, even when it doesn't feel natural, even when the old self fights back. And that voice will fight. It will tempt you with comfort, with delay, with all the reasons why today can be the exception. But every time you refuse to listen, something shifts, something cracks. That voice gets a little weaker because it's no longer being fed. The reactive part of you, the one that depended on mood and emotion, begins to lose its power. And in its place, something colder, calmer, more focused begins to grow. Not because you tried to be someone new, but because you repeated the right thing enough times to make it who you are. Repetition strips you down. It exposes the stories you've told yourself, stories about what you're capable of, what you deserve, how much discomfort you can handle. It forces you to face the truth, not in flashes of inspiration, but in moments where quitting feels easier, but you don't. That is the death of the fragile self, the one that used to stop when it got tired, the one that needed approval before it moved, the one that believed motivation was a prerequisite. That version can't survive repetition, because repetition demands something higher. It demands that you show up regardless of applause, regardless of mood, regardless of whether anyone else even notices. Carl Jung once said, "We are not what happened to us, we are what we choose to become." And repetition is that choice, made not once, but over and over, until it burns through the parts of you that used to fold. It's not glamorous. It doesn't feel good most days. But it works, because repetition isn't about performance, it's about programming. Every act repeated is a vote, and the more you vote, the clearer the identity becomes. You stop trying to be disciplined, you start being it. Without fanfare, without reward, just forward. And then something strange begins to happen. The same path that once felt heavy becomes the one you're most comfortable on. The same routine that once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like stability. You stop craving excitement, you start craving peace. The peace that only comes when your actions match your values. When there's no more tension between what you say you want and what you do. That alignment isn't born from chance. It's earned through deliberate repetition, through choosing discomfort so often that it becomes your new normal. That's when people start to notice, even if they can't explain it. They feel the difference in how you carry yourself, the calm, the conviction. You no longer need to talk about discipline because you've become it. Your choices speak, your habits speak, your silence speaks. You're no longer moved by chaos, no longer pulled by temptation, because repetition has hardened your edges. Not in a way that makes you cold, but in a way that makes you immovable. Plato once said, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And each repeated action is a small conquest, a reclaiming of the mind, of your attention, of your time. You don't always feel stronger, but you are. Every time you repeat what needs to be done, even when it's boring, even when it's thankless, you're building something inside that cannot be taken, something unshakable. Because while most people live reactively, waiting for the right feeling, the right mood, you've decided to live deliberately. That decision, repeated enough times, becomes destiny. The beauty of repetition is that it doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter you. It simply reflects who you are through what you consistently do. And if you don't like the reflection, you change the routine. You build new patterns. You start smaller if you have to, but you don't stop. Because every repeated action is not just a step forward, it's a knife carving away who you're not. It's a hammer forging who you are. And that's what discipline really is. Not pressure, not perfection, but precision. The slow, steady replacement of weakness with strength, chaos with order, reaction with control. You start to see time differently. You no longer rush. You no longer procrastinate. You understand that success doesn't come from massive bursts of effort, but from small things done well over and over until they compound. You understand that transformation isn't sudden. It's gradual. It's invisible at first, but it's happening. Every repetition is building something beneath the surface. And one day, you wake up and realize you're not hoping to become the disciplined one. You already are. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Repetition protects you from that waste. It saves you from the chaos of constantly starting over. Because every time you stop and restart, you lose momentum. But every time you repeat, even imperfectly, you gain it. That gain becomes compounding, and over time, it becomes a force that no one sees coming until it arrives. And when it arrives, when the disciplined version of you finally emerges, it doesn't look dramatic. It looks grounded, solid, reliable. You walk with purpose. You act with restraint. You speak less, but everything you say carries weight. Because you've done the work behind the words, you've earned your own respect. And once you've done that, everything else follows. Discipline isn't built in one day. It's built in every day, in every choice that says, I'll do it again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Repetition doesn't just change your habits, it changes your identity. And when identity changes, everything else does too. The old you fades, the one who hesitated, the one who needed to feel ready, the one who always found an excuse. And what's left is someone who just moves forward, who does the work, who shows up, who doesn't stop. Not because it's easy, but because it's who you've become. The disciplined version of you is not a dream. It's a decision, made in silence, forged in repetition, and lived without apology. You don't need more time, you need more truth. So take one more step, and then another, until you no longer recognize the person who used to wait. If you're ready for the next phase of becoming, watch one of the videos on your screen now. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.